Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming together for this opportunity to immerse ourselves in a great body of wisdom, which lies both in the text that's written in a book before us and is also written in the text of our individual lives. And we share both the written text and the text that we carry within us, and to enhance that body of wisdom and elevate ourselves as well. So we are going to be reading through this week's Torah portion, which is Parshat Shoftim, which is in the book of Deuteronomy. It begins in chapter 16 at verse 18. If you'd like to go and unmute at this point, we can together recite our blessing, giving thanks for this moment of study. Baruch atah Adonai
Elohim melech haolam,
Asher
kiddushani v'tzivani
la'asot b'divrei
Torah.
Thank you, God, for this opportunity to immerse ourselves in word, deed, and relationships. Again, we are in chapter 16, verse 18. Let me share with you the opening verses, and then I'll invite others to have an opportunity to read as well. You shall appoint magistrates and officials for your tribes in all the settlements that Adonai your God is giving you, and they shall govern the people with due justice. You shall not judge unfairly. You shall show no partiality. You shall not take bribes, for bribes blind the eyes of the discerning and upset the plea of the just. Justice, justice shall you pursue, that you may thrive and occupy the land that Adonai your God is giving you. You shall not set up a sacred post, any kind of pole beside the altar of Adonai your God that you may make, or erect a stone pillar, for such Adonai your God detests. We're now at the very beginning of chapter 17. June, would you like to read a few verses?
Thank you, Rabbi. You shall not sacrifice to the Lord your God an ox or a sheep that has any defect of a serious kind, for that is abhorrent to the Lord your God. If there is found among you in one of the settlements that the Lord your God is giving you, a man or woman who has affronted the Lord your God and transgressed his covenant, turning to the worship of other gods and bowing down to them, to the sun or the moon or any of the heavenly hosts, something I never commanded, and you have been informed or have learned of it, then you shall make a thorough inquiry. If it is true, the fact is established, that abhorrent thing was perpetrated in Israel, you shall take the man or the woman who did that wicked thing out to the public place, and you shall stone them, man or woman, to death. A person shall be put to death only on the testimony of 2 or more witnesses. He must not be put to death on the testimony of a single witness. Let the hands of the witnesses be the first against him to put him to death, and the hands of the rest of the people thereafter. Thus you will sweep out evil from your midst.
Thank you so much, Jude. Dave, would you like to read a little bit starting at verse 8?
If a case is too baffling for you to decide, be it a controversy over homicide, civil law, or assault, matters of dispute in your courts, you shall promptly repair to the place that your God Adonai will have chosen, and appear before the Levitical priests or the magistrate in charge at that time and present your problem. When they have announced to you the verdict in the case, you shall carry out the verdict that is announced to you from that place that Adonai chose, observing scrupulously all their instructions to you. You shall act in accordance with the instructions given you and the ruling handed down to you. You must not deviate from the verdict that they announce to you, either to the right or to the left. Should either party to the dispute act presumptuously and disregard the priest charged with serving there your God Adonai or the magistrate, that party shall die. Thus you will sweep out evil from Israel. All the people will hear and be afraid and will not act presumptuously again.
Thank you so much, Dave. Let me invite Jim. Would you like to read a little bit, starting at verse 14?
Thank you, Rabbi. If after you have entered the land that Adonai your God has assigned to you, and taken possession of it, and settled in it, you decide, I will set a king over me, as do all the nations about me. You shall be free to set a king over yourself, one chosen by Adonai your God. Be sure to set as king over yourself one of your own people. You must not send a foreigner over you, one who is not your kinsman. Moreover, he shall not keep many horses or send people back to Egypt to add to his horses, since Adonai has warned you. You must not go back that way again. And he shall not have many wives, lest his heart go astray, nor shall he amass silver and gold to excess. When he is seated on his royal throne, he shall have a copy of this teaching written for him on a scroll by the Levitical priests. Let it remain with him and let him read in all his life, so that he may learn to revere Adonai as God, to observe faithfully every word of this teaching, as well as these laws. Thus he will not act haughtily toward his fellows or deviate from the instruction to the right or to the left, to the end that he and his descendants may reign long in the midst of Israel.
Thank you so much. Robert, would you like to read a little bit at the very start of chapter 18?
Yes, thank you. The priests, the Levites, and all the tribe of Levi shall have no part nor inheritance with Israel. They shall eat the offerings of the Lord made by fire and his inheritance. Therefore shall they have no inheritance among their brethren. The Lord is their inheritance, as he hath said unto them. And this shall be the priest's due from the people, from them that offer a sacrifice, whether it be ox or sheep. And they shall give unto the priest the shoulder, and the 2 cheeks, and the maw. The first fruit also of thy corn, of thy wine, and of thine oil, and the first of the fleece of thy sheep shalt thou give him. For the Lord thy God hath chosen him out of all thy tribes to stand to minister in the name of the Lord, him and his sons forever. And if a Levite come from any of thy gates out of all Israel, where he sojourned, and come with all the desire of his mind unto the place which the Lord shall choose, then he shall minister in the name of the Lord his God, and all his brethren, the Levites, do, which stand there before the Lord. They shall have like portions to eat, beside that which cometh of the sale of his patrimony.
Thank you so much, Robert. Appreciate it. Dan, would you like to read a little bit that starts at verse 9 of chapter 18?
Thank you, Rabbi. Let's see here. When you enter the land that the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not learn to imitate the abhorrent practices of those nations. Let no one be found among you who consigns his son or daughter to the fire, or who is an augur, a soothsayer, a diviner, a sorcerer, one who casts spells, or one who consults ghosts or familiar spirits, or one who inquires of the dead. For anyone who does such things is abhorrent to the Lord, and it is because of these abhorrent things that the Lord your God is dispossessing them before you. You must be wholehearted with the Lord your God. Those nations that you are about to dispossess do indeed resort to soothsayers and augurs. To you, however, the Lord your God has not assigned the like.
Thank you, Dan. Catherine, would you like to read a little bit, starting at verse 15 of chapter 18?
Thank you, Rabbi. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet from among your own people. like myself. Him you shall, excuse me, him you shall heed. This is just what you asked of Adonai your God at Horeb on the day of the assembly, saying, let me not hear the voice of Adonai my God any longer, or see this wondrous fire any more, lest I die. Whereupon Adonai said to me, they have done well in speaking thus. I will raise up a prophet for them from among them, their own people like yourself. I will put my words to his mouth, and he will speak to them all that I command him. And if anybody fails to heed the words he speaks in my name, I myself him to account. But any prophet who presumes to speak in my name an oracle that I did not command him to utter, or who speaks in the name of other gods, that prophet shall die. And should you ask yourselves, how can we know that the oracle was not spoken by
Okay, Catherine, you've had a little freeze there in your transmission, so I'll complete
bread of
that.
him?
If you just start with verse 21 again, just read it.
Oh, verse 21 again?
Yeah, because
Okay.
we got frozen.
And should you ask yourselves, how can we know that the oracle was not spoken by the Lord? If the prophet speaks in the name of the Lord and the oracle does not come true, that oracle was not spoken by the Lord. The prophet has uttered it presumptuously. Do not stand in dread of him.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Richard, would you like to read a little bit starting at the beginning of chapter 19?
Yes, Rabbi, thank you. When the Lord your God has cut down the nations whose land the Lord your God is giving you, and you have dispossessed them and settled in their towns and homes, you shall set aside 3 cities in the land that the Lord your God is giving you to possess. You shall survey the distances and divide into 3 parts the territory of the country that the Lord your God has allotted to you, so that any manslayer may have a place to flee to. Now, this is the case of a manslayer who may flee there and live. One who has killed another unwittingly without having been his enemy in the past. For instance, a man goes with his neighbor into a grove to cut wood. As his hand swings the axe to cut down a tree, the axe head flies off the handle and strikes the other so that he dies. That man shall flee to one of these cities and live. Otherwise, when the distance is great, the blood avenger pursuing the manslayer in hot anger may overtake him and kill him. Yet he did not incur the death penalty, since he had never been the other's enemy. That is why I command you, set aside 3 cities. And when the Lord your God enlarges your territory, as we swore to your fathers, and gives you all the land that he promised to give your fathers, if you faithfully observe all the instruction which I enjoin upon you this day, to love the Lord your God and to walk in his ways at all times, then you shall add 3 more towns to those 3. Thus the blood of the innocent will not be shed, bringing blood guilt upon you in the land that the Lord your God is allotting to you.
Thank you, Richard. Mark Thompson, you want to read a little bit starting at verse 11?
Thank you, Rabbi. If, however, a person who is the enemy of another lies in wait for him and sets upon him and strikes him a fatal blow and then flees to one of these towns, the elders of his town shall have him brought back from there and shall hand him over to the blood avenger to be put to death. You must show him no pity. Thus you will purge Israel of the blood of the innocent, and it will go well with you. You shall not move your countrymen's landmarks set up by previous generations in the property that will be allotted to you in the land that Adonai your God has given you to possess. A single witness may not validate against a person any guilt or blame for any offense that may be committed. A case can be valid only on the testimony of 2 witnesses or more. If a man appears against another to testify maliciously and gives false testimony against him, the 2 parties to the dispute shall appear before Adonai, before the priests or magistrates in authority at the time, and the magistrates shall make a thorough investigation. If the man who testified is a false witness, if he has testified falsely against his fellow, you shall do to him as he schemed to do to his fellow. Thus you will sweep out evil from your midst. Others will hear and be afraid, and such evil things will not again be done in your midst. Nor must you show pity, life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot.
Thank you, Mark. Chris, I don't know if you have a copy of the text in front of you. If you do, would you like to read a little bit, starting at verse chapter 20?
Oh, yeah, I do. I'm just reading from Sepharia. I don't know if you have a specific translation.
We all have different translations and we welcome that. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, 21.
Yeah, so we're at chapter 20, verse 1.
Okay. When you take the field against your enemies and see horses and chariots, forces larger than yours, have no fear of them, for your God, who brought you from the land of Egypt, is with you. Before you join battle, the priest shall come forward and address the troops. He shall say to them, Hear, O Israel, you are about to join battle with your enemy. Let not your courage falter. Do not be in fear or in panic or in dread of them. For it is your God Adonai who marches with you to do battle for you against your enemy, to bring you victory. Then the officials shall address the troops as follows. Is there anyone who has built a new house but has not dedicated it? Let him go back to his home, lest he die in battle, and another dedicate it. Oh, how many you want me to read?
You can go all the way through verse 9.
Okay. Is there anyone who has planted a vineyard but has never harvested it? Let him go back to his home, lest he die in battle, another harvest it. Is there anyone who has paid the bride price for a wife, but who has not yet taken her into his household? Let him go back to his home, lest he die in battle, and another take her into his household as his wife. The officials shall go on addressing the troops and say, Is there anyone afraid and disheartened? Let him go back to his home, lest the courage of his comrades flag like this. When the officials have finished addressing the troops, army commanders shall assume command of the troops.
Thank you so much, Chris. And then Rose, would you like to continue at verse 10? And then you'll just need to unmute, Rose.
When you approach a town to attack it, you shall offer it terms of peace. If it responds peaceably and lets you in, all the people present there shall serve you at forced labor. And when your God Hashem delivers it into your hands, you should put all of its males to the sword. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped something. If it does not surrender to you, but would join battle with you, you shall lay siege to it. And when your God Hashem delivers it into your hands, you shall put all its males to the sword. You may, however, take as your booty the women, the children, the livestock, and everything in the town, all its spoil, and enjoy the use of the spoil of your enemy, which your God Hashem gives you. Thus you shall deal with all the towns that lie very far from you, towns that do not belong to nations hereabout. The towns of the latter peoples, however, which your God Hashem is giving you as a heritage, you shall not let a soul remain alive. No, you must prescribe them, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, and the Perizzites, the Hivitites, and the Jebusites, as your God Hashem has commanded you. Lest they lead you into doing all the abhorrent things they have done for their gods, and you shall stand guilty before your God. When in your war against the city, you have to besiege for a long time in order to capture it, You must not destroy its trees, wielding the axe against them. You may eat of them, but you must not cut them down. Or trees of the fields humans to withdraw before you into the besieged city. Only trees that you know do not yield food may be destroyed. You may cut them down for constructing siege works against a city that is waging war on you until it has been reduced.
Thank you so much. Marty Kennisburg, would you like to read at the very start of chapter 21?
Thank you, Rabbi. If in the land that the Lord your God is assigning you to possess, someone slain is found lying in the open, the identity of the slayer not being known, your elders and the magistrates shall go out and measure the distances from the corpse to the nearby towns. The elders of the town nearest to the corpse shall then take a heifer, which has never been worked, which has never pulled in a yoke, and the elders of that town shall bring the heifer down to an ever-flowing wadi, which is not tilled or sown. There in the wadi you shall break the heifer's neck. The priests, sons of Levi, shall come forward, for the Lord your God has chosen them to minister to him and to pronounce blessing in the name of the Lord. And every lawsuit in case of assault is subject to their ruling. Then all the elders of the town nearest to the corpse shall wash their hands over the heifer whose neck was broken in the wadi. And they shall make this declaration: our hands did not shed this blood, nor did our eyes see it done. Absolve, O Lord, your people Israel, whom you redeemed, and do not let guilt for the blood of the innocent remain among your people Israel, and they will be absolved of blood guilt. Thus you will remove from your midst guilt for the blood of the innocent, for you will be doing what is right in the sight of the Lord.
Thank you so much, Marty. Thank you, everyone. That's the entire Torah portion for the week. I'd like to present to you a focus study on it, and then we'll open it up for our collaborative conversation about it. If you have a copy of the study sheet, I invite you to take it out at this point. And I've titled this week's study sheet, The Expanding Power of Restraint. You know, ever since we've been reading the book of Deuteronomy, I continue to have this visual image of the Israelites there right at the borderline, ready to cross over from Moab into the promised land. And so the sense I have of these vast numbers of people, and they have been traveling for 2 generations now, 40 years, and all the hardship they've experienced, and they've been traveling through a wilderness, and they can see just beyond the border this lush land where they can grow food and raise herds and have a sense of finally having a sense of sovereignty. And I'm trying to feel the sense of excitement and the anticipation of 40 years of journeying that they must have been feeling. And I try to imagine that in a different context with a different people, perhaps the leaders of this group would have been ramping up everyone's enthusiasm and their anticipation and their excitement and stirring up their energy and everything. And here, throughout the book of Deuteronomy, there has been this theme of the message has been one of kind of caution and restraint and discipline. And here in this week's Torah portion, seems to me that plays such a profound bit of the theme, because I forget who it was that was reading it, who was reading the section about the appointment of a king. Who was reading about a king being appointed? Jim, thank you. So Jim was reading about when you cross over and you want to have a king, and then one would think that what would be described would be the enormous powers that this king would have. And instead, the text focuses mostly on the restraints on a king, the limitations on a king. So that is in number 3, we have that verse, a king may not keep many horses. He must keep a copy of this Torah before him. He may not elevate himself above others. Well, that's remarkable. And then I realized throughout this Torah portion, there are several other verses that describe limitations on what it means to be sovereign in this land. So here also in number 3 on the study sheet, a single witness may not validate against a person any guilt. So you can't have someone just come up and say, this person stole from me, or this person injured me. This person took something from me. No, you have to have at least 2 witnesses, and there needs to be some protocol, some process to manage all this. And then we have this remarkable description about what's known as the cities of sanctuary, also here in number 3, and that's from chapter 19. The blood avenger, pursuing the slayer in hot anger, might overtake and kill him. That is why I command you to set aside 3 cities. So the awareness that if you see someone who's a member of your family who's been killed, without any further investigation, you just might have your anger be inflamed, and you go after this person. And as a mere act of honor killing, you want to kill this person. And so here, this notion about, no, we need to make sure that you don't take out vengeance in a moment of heated emotion. And so we're going to have these sanctuary cities where people can go to in order to have some degree of separation and allow moments of the emotions to cool down and have some degree of rationality and fact-finding intervene in order to determine the appropriate next course. So I'm struck by this notion about on this moment of victory, all of these words about restraint and limitation. And here, perhaps one of the most famous verses in the Jewish Bible is in our weekly portion, and that's in chapter 16. Justice, justice shall you pursue, that you may thrive and take possession of the land that Adonai your God is giving you. And we have lots of commentators who wonder, why is the word justice repeated? And the notion, of course, being that nothing is merely redundant. And when our sage readers say that, what they're also referring to is it's not just about words can't be redundant. They're also saying no human being is redundant, because that's the value that the relationship between words and creation. So here, if you turn over on the study sheet, is a commentary from one of the great 19th century Hasidic rabbis, the Sfat Emet, who comments on this verse. And he wrote, the main thing is to seek truth. The verse says pursue, because we can never really come to truth in the fullest sense of the word. We have to keep pursuing justice, knowing that we have not yet attained it. So this sense of restraint on our certitude that we absolutely know what is truth. And Sfat Emet says, we need to make decisions, we need to do some fact-finding and come to some conclusions, but we should always be aware that we're wrong. And so that sense of having a limitation on our own capacity to be absolutely certain about what is true. So you turn back on the very front, I have this verse that's also in our Torah portion. And this notion that the verse is, a human being is a tree of the field. And then under it is this quote from Carl Jung, who wrote, no tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. I want to suggest that what's been happening during this journey ever since the departure from Egypt is that this has been an experience for people to encounter all of their fears, their anxieties, their smaller selves, their sense of envy, their sense of fear, anxiety, covetousness, and they build a calf, they complain. all of these have been important to encounter in order to finally get to a healthy tree. And I think that's what Jung is referring to, is that before you can begin to have any sense of elevation in your life, you need to explore the deep, dark, buried passions within yourself. So I would like to, if you turn to number 5 on the study sheet, this is a quote from, again, one of the great early Hasidic rabbis, Rabbi Nachman Bratslav, who is building upon this notion in the Zohar of Kabbalah that the world comes into existence because God and God's fullness withdraws God's self, allowing other things to come into existence. And so here's what Rabbi Nachman says, building upon that notion in Kabbalah. God withdrew the plenitude of God's being to make space for the world. A similar space must exist between human beings in order to imitate God and create viable worlds. Such a vacated space must also exist within us if we are to create viable selves. So Rabbi Nachman is saying, if we're going to imitate God, then what we need to do if we're going to bring worlds into existence is to restrain ourselves. We have to give space for other things to come into existence, not just in our relationships with others, but we also need to do that within ourselves. We need to vacate some of the arrogance, some of the certitude that we have within us to allow, if you will, some degree of caution, doubt even perhaps, to be part of our psychic makeup. With that, I'd like to share with you this week's painting, which is also on the front of our study sheet. And it's a painting by Agnes Martin. Agnes Martin was born, I believe it was in 1912, which is actually the same year that Jackson Pollock, the great abstract expressionist, was born. And she too, like Jackson Pollock, was born in a prairie. Her prairie was that of Saskatchewan in Canada. And she had a very difficult childhood. She had a very difficult, overbearing mother. And throughout much of her life, Agnes Martin was dealing with mental health issues. She eventually goes to New York City, and there she encounters a world which in some sense is really dominated by Jackson Pollock and others like him, who are engaged in this form of art called abstract expressionism, which is very muscular, which is very attention demanding, not only large pieces, but the egos of those who were engaged in this form was very loud and boisterous, if you will. And Agnes Martin enters into this world in New York City in the 1940s, and she begins to develop a very different approach. She seeks, if you will, what in our tradition we might call the still small voice, rather than the expansiveness and loudness and thickness of abstract expressionism. She tends to create works that are very restrained, very minimalist in what they present. And here on the front, you see her work called Friendship. And it's very characteristic of a lot of her work, which is, you can see she has vertical lines and horizontal lines, creating these little squares. It has this gold leaf overlaid with it. And much of her work was very simple in terms of their geographic design, very simple in terms of their coloring. And it was fascinating that in many of her exhibitions, people reacted quite vociferously, reacted very emotionally to her work, in some cases hostilely to her work. And some of her works were even vandalized. And Agnes Martin said with some sadness, I think, about how people were reacting. She said, I think people are just afraid of emptiness. She said, people just can't stand that those are all empty squares. A lot of her work was informed by the vocabulary of Zen. And she said, when you give up on the idea of the certitude of right and wrong, you don't get anything. What you get is rid of everything. And this notion about restraint and her style of painting, eventually she contributes to the development of a whole new form of art called minimalism, which focuses on the purity of what's on the canvas, the simplicity of the design, and focuses not on the kind of inner turmoil of the artist, which is what the abstract expressionists were focused on, but just on the pure simplicity of the geometric form and the color and the object that's on the canvas itself. Now, in addition to on the study sheet, I have a quote, number 6, from another artist who also was influenced a lot by Zen and by culture out of Japan, and that's Anne Bogart. Anne Bogart was the founder and is the co-artistic director of a theater company. She's a theater director. And the theater company is called the Saratoga International Theater Institute, which now is known as City. And she also is a professor, or has been a professor of theater at Columbia. And she wrote this: "One of the fundamental tools in making art is restraint. Restraint implies restriction, and restrictions inherent in every creative process are ultimately one's ally. Most successful artists understand the importance of restraint applied in moments of great excitement. And from Roy Orbison, Katie Lang learned physical containment and emotional expansion." So this relationship between containment and expansion, if you will, I think is also captured by this poem by Rilke, which is number 7 on the study sheet. "Space reaches out from us and translates the world. To know a tree in its true element, throw inner space around it, from that pure abundance in you. Surround it with restraint. It has no limits. Not till it is held in your renouncing is it truly there." Here we have the Israelites who are about to celebrate, if you will, this great climax, this journey of some 40 years, perhaps, and the climax of hundreds of years of their ancestors who had lived in exile in Egypt, to finally get to the land that had been promised way back when to Abraham, to Isaac, and Jacob. And instead of just having a moment of abandon and wild, enthusiastic, triumphal celebration, our Torah portion is cautioning restraint, because that is truly the way to create a world full of expansion. So with that, I would love to hear what you saw, what you felt, what you encountered during the course of our reading together. Let me invite first Catherine. Go ahead and unmute and share with us, Catherine.
I just want to say this is an amazing painting because it really makes it very difficult to look at with one pair of eyes. It really invites more than one pair of eyes to look at it. And that is the beginning of a conversation between viewers. And so I see a space for a conversation among viewers here that I don't see in a lot of other art.
Wow. Could you just say a little bit more about that? In what way do you experiencing that as inviting conversation? What about this painting does that for you?
Well, there's this undefined shapes in the center, and it invites interpretation, but it also at the same time makes it very difficult. It's very opaque, very difficult to decipher. And so it seems that we're not to encounter that difficulty alone, that we're to share that with others. And then we find a common ground where this idea of friendship can take shape.
You know, it's fascinating because although she spent much of her time in New York, which was full of all kinds of fervency about art, she spent the other half of her time in New Mexico, out in a very sparse and empty place. And so she has this dual experience between the density and camaraderie and all the excitement of New York, and then the quietude and the openness and the expanse of New Mexico. So that's fascinating that you mentioned that. So thank you so much. Let me invite Martin Hughes and then Rose. Go ahead, Martin.
Yeah, that business about breaking the cow's neck, I am pretty pissed off about that. Why would God allow order such a despicable thing when on the other hand he says don't use milk with the meat of a cow? You know, the meat and meat. Milk and meat. God, I can't even speak. So then, if he respects the mother so much that he gives us that law, breaking the neck of an innocent animal.
Yes, that disturbs you, the notion of killing an animal, or what part of it disturbs you?
All of it.
Uh-huh. Okay.
I mean, what the hell is this ritual going to do? You know, I understand ritual. I've created a few of my own in Prasad, but this just blows me away.
Okay. So
you know,
so we've been reading throughout the Torah that there is, at least at a certain time in Jewish history, this ritual of animal sacrifice, and I think we've taken votes before, and we've all voted that we're quite happy not to be practicing that form of Judaism. And so it is appropriate for you to be responding as a contemporary person about a practice of a couple thousand years ago and how one reacts to it. And I think we're all grateful that that's not the path that we have now in order to give our expressions of gratitude and worship. But so thank you for having that response.
well, it's good to hear that a lot of other Jews think this way. That's very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Okay, and Rose and Robert. And go ahead and unmute Rose. Thank you.
Now, I was looking at the Sephora to get the verses in Deuteronomy 20, from verse 10 till about 17.
Yeah.
I'm a little.
That's very troubling.
I'm sorry, we're not hearing you, Rose.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, not sure what was going on. Anyway, in chapter 20, it's starting with several verses after, starting with verse 10. It talks about if you are laying siege to a city, and it doesn't sound like the city is anything that Hashem is giving to them as part of the land of Canaan. It sounds like this is not, it says far from you. So it sounds like it's beyond the borders, which of the land that Hashem is giving, and you're laying siege to it, because as opposed to what's happening in the land that God is giving you, where they say kill everybody and clean off the land. Here, it's the information about the siege and about the trees you should leave. So I'm just wondering if this is saying that, wars of expansion are acceptable. Because it would seem to imply that they are from these verses.
Okay, I didn't read it that way. I didn't read it that this is.
The other said far from you. In other words, it says we weren't talking about the peoples, like the Jebusites and Canaanites and all these guys. It says far from you. Which,
Where does it say for far from you?
let me find it. It starts with verse 10. When you approach a town to attack it, you shall offer terms of peace. If it responds peacefully and lets you and all the people present shall serve you as forced labor. If it does not, but would do battle with you, you shall lay siege to it. And when Hashem delivers it into your hands, you should put all its males to the sword. You may, however, take all your booty, the town. That's then in verse 15.
I see.
Says, thus you shall deal with all the towns that lie very far from you, towns that do not belong to the nations hereabout, which means it's not the other people who are listed. It says in the towns of the latter peoples, in other words,
So
ones I want you to get rid of is a heritage, you shall not let a soul remain alive, which implies to me that this is giving the okay to, wars of empire, wars of expansion.
right. So I'm not sure what that means. I do know that there has developed over hundreds of years a great body of Jewish wisdom and Jewish law related to the waging of war and the distinction between required wars and then wars that are not required and the conditions under which you could wage those and so forth. So I'm not sure what this is referring to in terms of.
That's what it sounds like. It's very, it's just kind of in there. And people, I see people don't really notice it, but I'm going, what's going on here? This is not, because it doesn't sound like it's the land that Hashem is giving. It sounds like more, expansion. And I think there are lots of references to the future, what happens with David, and particularly with Solomon, who marries too many wives and gets led astray.
Yeah, thank you. All right, let me call upon Robert and then Dave.
Well, thank you again for another lovely evening and, such diversity of insights. So in chapter 20, I think it was verses 5 through 8, there was such, I think, an exquisite blending of mercy and justice. So yes, they had to go out to war, but if you have a wife that you're supposed to be married to, if you have crops that are not yet taken care of, etc. So that moderation of law. And I thought of this fellow, I probably heard this 30 years ago, 25, 30 years ago, but in California, 3 offenses, you're out. His third offense was stealing a 27-cent loaf of bread. The man was hungry. So figuring it even at just $40,000 a year over 30 years, you do the math and you realize that some of the concepts here are so relevant today because truth is always relevant. The other thing that comes to mind is justice. What does it mean to give? So my understanding of justice is each one receiving his due. You buy an ice cream for $4, you give him $4, that's justice. You give him $5, $4 of it is justice, $1, but his mercy, you give him less. Well, that's cheating. That won't do. And I think justice to God is not trying to understand his mind. It's impossible to understand the mind of God. You know, there's a verse in the Quran and in the Baha'i writings where it says, he doeth whatsoever he willeth and ordaineth that which he pleaseth. And in religion, we find things that are difficult to understand. But the question is, can we ever understand the mind of God? And can we ever assume that we know more than he does? And what I'm calling he is an unknowable essence, as I understand it, some force. So in the same way that the mineral can't understand the vegetable kingdom can't understand the animal kingdom can't understand mind. It can only understand what is sensible, not what is knowable. Physics are knowable, et cetera, et cetera. And in the same way, when we try and make that leap to the realm of God, I think we're in a realm that is way ahead, way above us. So the question is, to what level do we trust Scripture? And it doesn't matter what our faith is, you know, because we all have this same challenge. And then my last comment, when I read the Torah or the Baha'i writings, clearly criticism is not acceptable. Undue criticism, not acceptable. And yet we see artists year after year, century after century, people as well, criticizing art. Why? They should be encouraging it. It's from a person's heart. It's their expression. And I loved Catherine's comment because I found myself gazing at this, saying, what is it that I'm supposed to get out of this? Because there's so many open windows and it just calls one to reflect.
So thank you so much, Rory. Here's what I got out of what you just said and helping me to also reflect back on what Catherine said, which is that great art is that which invites further artistic expression rather than that which seeks to be an obstacle to further creative expression. And so I love the fact that both you and Catherine are kind of looking at this painting, and you're just as we are looking at this text. So the written text that we've been reading, what the rabbis teach us is that the text itself should not be a form of restraint on our capacity to be creative with what we see there. It is designed to, it's an invitation to discover more than what appears in the black letters of what's written there. That we are to use our creativity, our interpretive capacities to elicit out of it more than what appears on the surface. And of course, that's the very basis of what becomes known as midrash, to do that teasing out and that creative act. So I want to thank you so much. And again, thank Catherine for her comments as well. Let me invite Dave, Marty, and Mark. So go ahead, Dave.
Okay, your talk about the excitement of the Israelites on the banks of the Jordan and expecting to be free in their own land once they cross the Jordan reminds me of, or makes me think of another population who is approaching the banks of another river with high expectations to be free once they cross this river. And sadly, that's what it makes me think of right now.
No, thank you, Dave. That's always good to bring us back into the present to face our own world. Thank you so much. And Marty and Mark.
Regarding the breaking the neck of the heifer, I would like to observe that there's a long tradition in the Tanakh of projecting human transgressions to animals. It's done obviously through animal sacrifice. Another thing that comes to mind is the scapegoat, where the goat is freed, but the transgressions go with the goat. So this is a vehicle that's used throughout the 5 books of Moses, and it's a very common one. Apparently, of course, they were very intimate with animals, and so that may have been a very strong bond. Most of us don't have that bond, but that's a pronounced tendency throughout the Bible.
You know, what you reminded me is that at sundown tonight, we observe the first day of the month of Elul. And this is also in tradition known as the time for the tithing of animals. So there's you just reminded me of the degree to which we incorporate the value of animals into our calendrical cycles as well. So thank you for that. Let me invite Mark and then Richard here. Yeah, Mark.
Thank you. I'd like to share something that's disturbing me a little bit, and I want to refer to your item number 1 in the study sheet. A human being is a tree of the field. I think that's a very interesting statement in its own. I'm looking at the Hebrew, and the translation of the JPS actually states it in the form of a question. Are trees of the field human to withdraw before you into the besieged city? I'm not sure I really understand that, but beside the fact, still an interesting comment about a tree having a human quality. And the fact that in this particular portion, we're talking about how you must respect the trees, you must respect nature. The tree is given the same benefit as a human being in this passage, and yet earlier in the passage we read, even with strangers, that we're not to give them any hope for redemption if they violate what we consider to be our values. So I just find the discrepancy disturbing, and I'd like to see if you or anyone else would like to comment about that.
Well, first of all, in terms of my theme about the message about restraint, that's coming in the context of a narrative that says when you go and attack a town, you might want to just cut down every tree that you see in order to create siege works to attack the town. And that might well be in the immediate sense a very sensible thing to do. And therefore the Torah says, no, you can't cut down every tree. You can only cut down those trees that aren't providing fruit. Why? Because eventually, if you're successful, you'll need food. And so you need to defer the immediate need that you have for having siege works for the long-term benefit of having food once you've been successful. So that's what I'm reading there, and I'm sure I'm not getting all of your addressing all of your disturbance, but that's the part of it that jumps out.
Well, you've shown there's a distinction between a fruit-bearing tree and one that is not.
And field, what is field there? Is field a place where you plant crops and grow things, or is field like meadow in the forest?
Field, yeah, I don't know. Today it means field, whether it's defining something where you grow crops or where you graze. I'm not sure I can answer that. But also to respond to Mark's pointing out that here in this translation, it comes up as a question. Again, we know that we don't have punctuation in our original text. And so literally what it does say is, Adam eitz hasadeh, because a human being is a tree of the field. So that's.
And can I interject Alder's translation?
Sure.
He says, for is the tree of the field a human to come away from you in the siege? So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, so what he is, I think, emphasizing is the helplessness of the tree.
Mhm.
That the tree doesn't have the capacity to get out of your way, to flee in the presence of an attacking force. So you need to be careful of that. Let me invite Richard. Yeah.
Thank you. A couple of things. One, I noticed that it takes more than one to validate someone's guilt. And elsewhere, we're told, I can't remember where, but in a death sentence, all it takes is one person to say, no, 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 no. You have to go by a series of rabbis and legislators or whatever to everybody affirm the sentence. And it only takes one of them to say no. And this brings me to the other thing about the tree, that your quotation from Jung.
I think Richard's
that
right.
If the tree, the roots have to go to hell. And that made me want to cry, because what I imagined was, there's a way for who's ever down there in hell to what's the word, rehabilitate, by coming up and being part of what gives us oxygen on our planet. And so these trees that don't bear fruit, they're doing something. And the other thing I had in mind was about this quote recurred to me from Thomas Newman. Talfourd wrote a play: fill the seats of justice with good men, but not so absolute injustice as to forget what human frailty is. And I think this portion speaks to that. Restrain yourself from vengeance. When something happens by accident, the accidental, when the axe goes aside. The last thing was, it sounds terrible to break this poor calf's neck, but it's instant death too. And that's, I don't know if that's part of, but there is a kosher butchering that takes into account that to do this service, to make this food, I do have dominion over these animals, and some of them will turn into food. And when we do it, when we slaughter them, we do it in a way that is less painful for them. And I don't know if that applies to this or not, but certainly breaking somebody's neck is a pretty quick way to put them in.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So to honor our time together, did you want to say something, Anna?
I
Yeah.
have a question for you. When we were in New York, didn't we go to the Guggenheim and see an exhibit of Agnes Martin's work?
Yeah.
Okay, my experience of her work was it was so peaceful. It was very intricate. Many of her works have, more lines and little spaces than you can see here, but it was such a peaceful experience to look at what she did. And I'm thinking that when you have a true friendship, you have a relationship of peace. And the question about going to the city and overtaking it and attacking it and aggressing outward, all of that followed. If the city won't engage with you in a relationship of friendship, of peace, and I think I'd like to encourage everyone to look up her work and look at some more of it, because it's quite intricate, it's delicate, some of them are on massive canvases, it's big and it's small at the same time. It's quite fascinating. But I liked how it relates to peace and friendship.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you for remembering the exhibit that we saw at the Guggenheim of her work. So, and to honor our time and session together, I just want to acknowledge that sometimes we read the text and we're reading it totally on the historical level about events that were happening at one point in time. And I think that's a valuable way to read the text. There's another dimension to the text, which is basically saying, look, beyond what's happening right now is what will be happening in the future. And to settle in the land is going to require a series of lessons that are beyond what's happening right now. And here within this text, we're reading about attacking towns and attacking nations and so forth. That's happening at this historical level in this moment in time. In addition to that, there's this other series of lessons that are being sowed among the Israelites, and in the hope that they take root and grow. And those have to do with the fact that ultimately, that to be victorious in one's journey in the world is not to dominate others, it's to create space through restraint. And I just want to acknowledge that when we have our discussions, the capacity that we give one another to share our provocations, our questions, our insights, our thoughts, our hopes, and our dreams is a beautiful, beautiful thing. I'm so grateful that you all contribute to that and to my own growth as well. Thank you so much, everyone. I look forward to our regathering. God bless you all. Be well.
Thank you.
You. Bye.
Rabbi.
Thank you.